right, good morning. How is everybody doing? All right. Any questions over the readings today? Everybody's good to go? All right. Let's go ahead and get on it then. All right. So, the Bush Doctrine. Now I'm kind of struggling because looking at the answers I got back, I'm not certain if the book was as clear as I thought it was. The Bush Doctrine is when George W. Bush says that if someone is scary, you can preemptively declare war against them. So I will. Really? Okay. Okay. I'll work on that then. He is updating the book, and I obviously didn't catch that he changed some stuff. So the problem with this, if I preemptively declare war against somebody who could threaten me, what does that mean?
We're the aggressor.
That we become the aggressor. Is there any chance that Canada could threaten the U.S.? Yeah, they have military. Is there any chance that Russia could threaten the U.S.? China? Should we just go around attacking anybody who has the ability to harm us? Do you see why that might be a problem? Okay. So I will go back and I'm going to just say, since the book is not clear, I will check. But if the book is not clear, then I will go ahead and give all you guys credit for that. So, all right. So we are talking about the Bush administration today. We're going to be talking about 9/11 and what happens in 9/11. My generation, almost everybody knows where they were, what they were doing when 9/11 happened. It was really embarrassing the first time that I talked to a class. I'm like, hey, where were you guys at? And somebody's like, I was 2.5. I have no memory of this. And so this is why I want to make sure that I walk through this with you to say, hey, what did happen? I will say, I went to war and I lost some friends because of this war, so I will try not to get too wildly crazy, but I have some opinions, so I will try to keep those opinions fairly settled. All right, so what happens during 9/11?
Al-Qaeda hijackers took over 4 different airplanes or whatever and crashed them into the World Trade Centers and then the Pentagon and then attempt for the White House, but that one didn't work.
Yeah. So there were guys who basically said, I'm going to take over a plane, and once I hijack the plane, we're going to use the plane as a weapon, right? And crash it into various places. So the first thing I will say, this is the first attack on the U.S. continent, the continental U.S. since 1815. So we're not used to having people attack the U.S., right? And I have to say major attack because Pancho Villa attacked down in New Mexico, I believe. But
Well, Pearl Harbor.
well, that's not continental U.S.
Oh.
Yeah, and so Pearl Harbor definitely is an attack on U.S. soil, but that got us into World War II. So people should know if you attack the U.S., we are going to engage. There's very little that solidifies the U.S. more than an attack on U.S. soil. And so when it happens, I remember I was actually sitting in a class, and I would like to say I was in college. I was actually in a military course to teach me how to be a good joint officer. I had been assigned to U.S. Central Command's counterterrorism team, so they wanted to teach me how to work with other people. We're all sitting there. The instructor rolls in and he says, hey, you guys need to see this clip. And he flips on a TV and there's a picture of a plane flying into a building. Or actually, I don't even think there was a picture, but they were talking about a plane flying into the World Trade Center. And they said, this is a horrible accident. We don't know if the person who was piloting the plane had a heart attack or what happened. And as they're talking, we're trying to figure out what's going on. The instructor goes, okay, I just wanted you guys to see this. He turns off the TV. There was a Special Forces Army colonel sitting right behind me, kind of diagonally. And he said, turn the TV back on. And the instructor's like, well, sir, we've got to get stuff done and da-da-da. And the colonel's like, turn the TV back on. And he starts to argue again, and the colonel said, either you turn it on or I will turn it on for you. And so he flips the TV back on, and as he flips the TV back on, you see the second plane coming. Now, when the first plane hits, again, everybody thinks this is an accident. No one has ever done anything like this before. When the second plane hits, then immediately everybody in the room said, we're going to war. This is not an accident. This is an intentional attack on the U.S., and we are going to war. So when you look at it, why there's 4 planes, and in the fourth one, the passengers fight back. Why did the passengers not fight back for the first 3?
Shock.
Yeah, so terrorism up to this point was a way different thing than this terrorism. Every other terrorist experience that people had, someone came in, they took over the plane, you would probably land the plane somewhere, there would be negotiations, and after the negotiations, they would get their money or they would get whatever highlighted that they wanted to. They would leave the plane, you would go home, everything's fine because you lost a few hours, but you had a cool story to tell your kids, right? What happens if you attack the terrorists prior to this point? Then there is a chance you die, right? So the lesson learned is you just sit in your seat, you let things be, and it'll be okay. It'll cost you a couple hours, but it'll be okay. For this one, when the terrorists came in, they had box cutters, right? So realistically, is that even a big threat? No. So everybody, at this point, people were still able to carry knives. They were still, whatever you wanted to on the plane, not guns, but you could carry things that could be used as weapons on the planes because it was not that big a deal. And so no one thought anything about it. When they took over the plane, everybody's like, okay, it's going to cost us a couple hours, but we're going to sit tight, no big deal. Why is the fourth plane different?
Because they already know what happened.
Because they actually had the ability to talk to people on cell phones, and people started saying, hey, you need to know there are people who, they're crashing the planes into buildings. And so now they're like, well, if we're going to die anyway, we might as well do something to make sure this doesn't happen. So how many people die in 9/11?
2,977.
Brilliant, almost like you could read it. So almost 3,000 people, right? Now I want to give you some examples to kind of get a perspective on this. In Antietam, 3,650 people died. In D-Day, 2,400 people died. Pearl Harbor, 2,400 people died. So this is at the same level as some of our greatest tragedies, right? What's the difference between 9/11 and those 3 incidents?
This was on U.S. soil. There was an act against the United States.
Okay, this was against the U.S. and on U.S. soil. The other thing, what do these 3 have in common? They're all in war, and they're military guys, right? What happened in 9/11? Civilians. And so this is the other thing that makes it so egregious, is to say, wait a minute, you killed almost 3,000 civilians in an undeclared act where you just attacked us. All right, so as I said, there are 19 hijackers, 4 flights. They wanted to hit the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, the Capitol building, and potentially the White House. Why those areas? What is the thought process? Anybody know? Think about what they represent. So you have the U.S. economy, the U.S. military, and the U.S. political leadership, right? So they wanted to take down the economy, they wanted to take down the military capabilities, and they want to take out U.S. political leadership. And so then they could say that they destroyed the U.S. Now, why would they do this? Al-Qaeda leader, Osama bin Laden, takes credit for it, and he says it's because of the moral bankruptcy of America that we're putting garbage out in the movies and corrupting the world. We also sent U.S. soldiers into Saudi Arabia, which he believes was only for Muslims. And so he says we're not going to stand for this. We're going to go ahead and take the U.S. out. We quickly tie it to Al-Qaeda. And now I will say, why is this an intelligence failure? You guys are being nice. It is an intelligence failure. However, I will say, in defense of the U.S. intelligence community, at the time, legally, the law enforcement side could not talk to the international side. So the international side knew Al-Qaeda was planning attacks. They knew that they were going to be with planes, but we thought it was going to be overseas. The law enforcement side knew there was stuff going on here, but because we legally were not able to talk to each other, we could not let the law enforcement side know what we knew, and they could not let us know what they knew. So because of the laws in place to ensure that no one's rights got trampled, we weren't able to talk to each other, and we weren't able to find out what happened. All right, so once we find out it's Al-Qaeda behind this, and we want to do something, right? So where is Al-Qaeda? What country is Al-Qaeda associated with? Yeah, it's not a country, right? And this is a unique situation. So now we have to figure out, how do you deal with non-state actors? So we go ahead and we're talking about, all right, we know where Osama bin Laden is, and Osama bin Laden is in Afghanistan. We talk to Afghanistan and say, look, if you release Osama bin Laden to us, we will put him in prison. Well, we'll try him and do what happens after the trial. Now, the problem is, under Islam, can the Taliban, can Afghanistan release him to us? No. Under Islam, he is a guest of Afghanistan, so they cannot release him to us, especially since he is a Muslim. And so they said, you know what, we have a better idea. You give us all the evidence you have, and we will try him in our courts under Sharia law. Now, for the U.S., is this a good decision? No, because one, in order for us to prove that he was behind it, we would have to release all of the intelligence we have that shows he's behind it, right? So do you want to release all the intelligence that tells him how to do a better job in the future? Right. The other thing is, under Islam, under the strict Islam understanding, if you have given someone a chance to convert to Islam and they don't, then you have the right to kill them. Osama bin Laden sent out several fatwas that said, hey, U.S., you're evil and we're going to destroy you. This was his opportunity for us to convert and become Muslims. So under Sharia law, he was okay. He did a right thing. And so we're like, no, that isn't going to work for us. So now what do? The world is strongly with us, and so we have a joint resolution that says we're going to go to war against Afghanistan to fight and take out Al-Qaeda. We're going to overthrow the Taliban and make sure that we win. This is a problem. So Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires. Anybody know why?
Every time an empire goes in, they can't win, and they just die.
It's amazing. Afghanistan cannot fight anyone else outside of its borders because they are not really a nation. They don't consider themselves a nation. They consider themselves still many different tribes. However, yes, the answer is everybody has gone into Afghanistan. The Greeks went in and they got defeated. The Arabs went in, they got defeated. If I remember correctly, the Mongols went in and they got defeated. The British have gone in and they were defeated. The Soviet Union goes in and they are defeated. The US goes in and we didn't accomplish our goal either, right? So it's amazing. Why is Afghanistan so good at fighting off outsiders? It's really rough country. It's mountainous. It's, as I said, there are all these different groups who consider themselves the owner, the controller of certain territories. So you could come in and you will fight one place, but as soon as you get through that place, then you walk into the next place and they're going to attack you, and the next people are going to attack you. And everyone has been fighting all of their lives with each other, and they're used to fighting in this environment, so they are ready. Now, knowing this, the US actually comes up with a brilliant plan, and we say, instead of us going in and fighting everyone, how about we will just take money in, and I will say, hey, are you willing to fight the Taliban that you hate? By the way, I'll give you $100,000. And you're like, sure. And I go to the next person, I say, are you willing to, give, if I give you money, will you fight the Taliban? So what we wind up doing is helping pay all of the organizations that already hate the Taliban to fight the Taliban with us and for us. And this is a brilliant plan, because now you're using the guys who already know how to fight in Afghanistan to do the fighting for you. And instead of fighting every single person in Afghanistan, you are fighting the Taliban and getting the other guys to fight with you. So if you notice, we actually wind up doing very, very well. So the 18th of September, we have the joint resolution for war. By October 7th, we start bombing Afghanistan. By December 7th, we have taken the last major Taliban stronghold. So we have accomplished what no one else has been able to do, right? It's a pretty amazing feat. And so then what happens? All of a sudden, so when 9/11 happens, Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld immediately say, this is Iraq. Why would they say this is Iraq? Since 91, the U.S. has been trying to force Iraq to abide by stipulations that we put on it after the war. And every time Saddam Hussein is like, okay, I'll do it. And he's like, no. And so it's kind of sad, kind of funny, but I had numerous holidays ruined because Saddam Hussein, right before a holiday, would be like, hey, I'm not playing. And then we would have to get the military going and start ramping things up. And then just as you're putting troops on the ground or starting to move them, he's like, okay, I'm sorry, I'll do it. And so everything kind of ramps down again. So I think Dick Cheney especially was angry because George H.W. Bush did not let him overthrow Saddam Hussein. And so he was looking for any opportunity to take down Iraq. When you look at it, there is no chance that Iraq was behind this. In fact, they came to us, and again, I was working in the counterterrorism shop in CENTCOM, so focused in this area, focused on this topic. They came back and they said, the Secretary of Defense wants you to prove that Saddam Hussein was behind this. And we said, there's no way. Saddam Hussein is a secular ruler of a Muslim country. So what authority does he have? The only authority he has is the ability to harm you or kill you, right? And so that's, I'll admit, that's a big motivator. People don't like to get killed. They don't like their family to be harmed. And so they're like, okay, we'll do what he says. What happens if Saddam Hussein brings in a religious leader into Iraq? What does that religious leader have the authority to do?
Change the country into whatever religion he is.
Yes. So if they are a Muslim leader, it's a Muslim country, he can say, if you do what I say, then you are guaranteed paradise. Right? You're guaranteed to go to heaven if you do what I say. So even if Saddam Hussein kills you, you are guaranteed to go to heaven. Now, is that going to be a good deal to people? Yes. And so Saddam Hussein knows that if he brings in a military, religious leader, he is giving up all his authority because he is not a religious leader. And so there is no way that he would give up his authority and allow a religious leader like Osama bin Laden to have any position or any authority in Iraq. And so we're like, that's just not realistic. So they said, all right, well, in that case, and so a couple days later, I was over with the WMD guys, chatting with them about some stuff. When I was in there, the general came in, he said, hey, the secretary wants you guys to prove that Iraq has WMD that they are giving to Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda to use against the US. And I remember the leader of the shop, the guy who's been running WMD for all the Middle East for years, looked him in the face and said, sir, I guarantee you that's not happening. I will bet you a case of wine that you will not find anything about Iraq giving WMD to Osama bin Laden. In fact, if I remember correctly, he said, I will give you a case of wine if you find WMD in Iraq, weapons of mass destruction. And so, so the intelligence guys are like, no, this is not happening. But the political leaders wanted to fight Iraq so badly that they made intelligence up. So why could they say this? In 83, Saddam used mustard gas on Iran. In 88, they used chemical weapons on the Kurds. In 91, we said you have to remove all the WMD, and we started to inspect, and Saddam Hussein would keep pushing back on all the inspections. So it was credible to say that there had been WMD in Iraq at some point. But when all of your intelligence people are telling you, no, this is not true, I am really frustrated that we have politicians who are like, well, then make it up. Because that's not what intelligence is for. So in January 2002, Bush comes up with the Axis of Evil speech, and he says that North Korea and Iraq and Al-Qaeda, they are the axis of evil, and I believe Iran was in there. And he's like, we have to do something about them. In February 2003, Colin Powell gets sent to the UN, and he starts giving presentations about, yellow cake and this other stuff. At the time, somebody who was in the CIA came out and was like, hey, yellow cake is not what you think it is. It's not something that will help create the bombs like you're saying it is. So you're looking stupid. But in March of 17, Bush came up with Iraq is a threat to the U.S. They could harm us, not that they have plans to harm us, not that they have taken actions that show that they are going to harm us, but they have the capability to harm us in the future somehow at some point. Therefore, that gives us the right to attack them. And this is one of the most dangerous things I have heard in my entire life, because what that means is Adolf Hitler could say, hey, Czechoslovakia has the capability to harm us, we're going to attack them. Poland has the capability to harm us, so we're going to attack them. We have just turned ourselves into Hitler. We have just turned ourselves into any nation who decides that I'm going to attack you because I can. At this point, most of the world steps back and it's like, okay, we're not helping you anymore. I worked really closely with a Canadian Lieutenant Colonel intel guy. He and I were very tight. We would talk all the time about Afghanistan. When we decided that we were going to go into Iraq, he came to my office and he's like, hey, I just want to let you know that my country says I can't do anything for you in regards to Iraq. We still want to help you with Afghanistan, but we think you're doing the wrong thing, so we're stepping back. And most of the other people that I worked with said the same thing. So now, what do? We sent forces into Qatar. I think now they're calling it Qatar. But we sent a lead organization in to make sure that we were doing the planning for Iraq. I got to go there with that group because I got to miss Christmas and my children's birthdays again. And by March 20th, we invade Iraq. Now it's interesting because they said, this is not an invasion, we are helping the Iraqi people to overthrow their leader. Now, I will give you, Saddam Hussein was a dirtbag. He was a horrible man. He did incredibly horrible garbage, right? But it's one thing to say that a leader is bad. It's another to overthrow a country and take care of their leadership. This time, most Iraqi troops refused to fight. Why do you think they would refuse to fight?
Because they don't know why we're attacking them.
Well, in 1991, what happened to guys who fought to the U.S.?
Oh, they got shot.
They got killed. What happened to the guys who surrendered? We took care of them. And they're like, okay, there's no reason for us to die. We'll just go ahead and surrender. They will take care of us. Everything will be fine. So by May 1st, we have taken over much of Iraq, and there's only 150 combat deaths, which in one sense, 150 people dying is bad, but for a war, that is really pretty amazing. So May 1st, Bush declares an end to major combat. The Iraqi people were like, okay, you guys are fine. You have overthrown our leader, so now take care of us. This is the part where we are idiots. Okay, we were idiots because we attacked, but we're even greater idiots now because when we went in, you always plan how to get there, how to fight the fight, and then you plan what happens when the fight is over. So I remember sitting in my happy little tent, and all of a sudden, guy comes, slaps on the flap, and he's like, hey, Bath, we need you to come in and provide us some information for the phase 4 planning. And I actually laughed. And I said, yeah, whatever. And he's like, no, we're serious. And I said, you don't go to war without doing the phase 4 planning. And he goes, well, this time we did. Phase 4 is what happens when combat ends. How do you make sure the country stays fine, right? We didn't plan for that at all. In fact, the Chief of Staff of the Army had told Donald Rumsfeld that we did not have the military that we needed to go into Iraq, and that he needed time to prepare the Army and time to prepare the plans. Rumsfeld basically told him, sit down and shut up. We're going to this war, and we really don't care what you have to say. So when we get there, all of a sudden, Saddam Hussein is overthrown, but when that happens and we're in charge, that means we're responsible for the people, right? We have to take care of law enforcement. We have to make sure that basic electricity and all that stuff, phone lines, are still working. They aren't. And so the Iraqi people started to get mad at us and say, why is the U.S. screwing us over? Why did the U.S. come in here and harm us? And I said, well, this wasn't intentional. You know, we didn't plan for this. And a lot of the Iraqis got really angry, and they're like, how could you not plan? You planned to overthrow our leader. How could you not plan to have something going on afterwards? And they were totally correct. The other thing that really infuriated me was Donald Rumsfeld came out and said, you know, hey, I want to talk to you guys about how cool you are. One of the junior enlisted guys, because the rest of us were too chicken to say anything, said, why did you send us to war without body armor, without proper equipment? And Donald Rumsfeld had the gall to say, you go to war with the army you have, not with the army you want. Well, that's fine if someone attacks you. So if we're fighting a defensive war, then yes, you do what you need to do. But if you're fighting a preemptive war, maybe you should get your act together and not kill hundreds and thousands of people because you're incompetent, right? So I'm sorry, I'll try to slow down on that a little bit. But all right, the next thing we do is de-Baathification. Now, in Nazi Germany, they said after Germany was taken over, we're going to get rid of the Nazis. And that makes sense because there were people who knew how to do things that were not Nazis. In Iraq, if you weren't part of the Ba'ath Party, if you weren't part of Saddam Hussein's group, you did not take any leadership positions. If you wanted to be dog catcher, you had to be part of the Ba'ath Party. So everyone who was a leader in the military, everyone who was a leader in politics, everyone who worked in law enforcement, all of those people were members of the Ba'ath Party. So when we walk in and say, we are going to get rid of all the people that have worked in the Ba'ath Party, that means anybody who has any leadership skills or knows how to use a gun is now out of a job and sidelined. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, that's a real problem, right? If I walked into this area and said, anybody who knows how to work a computer has to leave, what happens? Are we going to have a school? No, you can't, because there's nobody left to make the school happen. So we basically wind up ticking off almost everybody who has any authority or power in Iraq, and we create the insurgency. So when we first went in, these guys were kind of on our side. They're like, fine, you know, we really didn't like Saddam Hussein in the first place. And so there were some guys who supported him, but the average Iraqi was like, yeah, whatever. When we take away their ability to have a job, to take care of their family, and to protect themselves, then we create a much bigger insurgency. So, and the military winds up being used like it was in Vietnam. We go out, we fight, and then we go back and hide at night. And so the people are like, well, you're not taking care of us, and you're leaving us, so the other people can attack us. We will side with them because at least they protect us. On December 13th, we capture Saddam Hussein. Kind of interesting. So there was a farm, and we had a gentleman that took us out to the farm. He kept walking over toward this rug and he would kind of stomp next to the rug. And finally somebody said, "Oh, do we need to look under there?" And he was kind of like, "Well, yeah." And so they pull the rug aside. There was a hole. We pull Saddam Hussein out, but we don't know what else is in there. And so it's kind of interesting. The person that actually goes into the hole to see who else is down there turns out to be a young woman, because she was the only one small enough to actually be able to get into the hole with her body armor. So it was a young Army interrogator. And so she went in. Thankfully, there was nobody else in there. But we captured Saddam Hussein. They have a trial, and they execute him for all of the criminal activity he did against the Iraqi people. But while we're doing all this, we're not paying attention in Afghanistan, right? So what happens in Afghanistan when we're paying attention to Iraq?
It says that the Taliban regained strength.
Yeah. So the Taliban starts building up strength and starts regaining their positions. So we had them, against the wall. We had them completely defeated. And then because we refocused on Iraq, not only did we screw Iraq up, but we also screwed Afghanistan up. So again, most of our allies are really frustrated with us, and we create the instigation for the insurgency. All right, so finally in 2007, there is a new mindset. They bring in a new leader, Petraeus, and he says, instead of doing things like we do in Afghanistan, let's do them, like we do in all the other wars. Let's take control of territory. Let's take care of the people in the territory. Let's let them know that we are going to take care of them, and then they will help us. And it works. Now, I will admit, by 2009, I was done with this and have moved into a new position. But I remember when I was there, one of the houses we took down, we rolled in, everything is done, and all of a sudden these guys come rolling into the house, and they are talking very excitedly. They're speaking Arabic, so I had no idea what they were saying. And so I pulled my gun out, and the captain with me said, "Hey, sir, hang on. These are the local leaders. They just want to know what's going on." So we had our interpreter kind of talk to them and say, "Hey, this is what's happening." At that point, they start yelling. And I'm like, "Okay, what's going on now?" And he said, "Yeah, they just told the lady of the house to fix us lunch because we're their guests and she's being rude to us." And I'm like, I don't want to eat lunch that this lady is cooking because we're taking her husband out. And they're like, no, it'd be really rude of us not to do that. But it was amazing when you engage the local leaders, then they supported you. When we start doing this, all of the people are like, "Okay, you're taking care of us now. We really don't like Al-Qaeda in Iraq. We really don't like these guys who are harming us. So if you will trust us, if you will help us, then we will help you, and we will help you get rid of them." So finally in 2007, we get the Iraqi people on our side, and they start working with us. We also try to start working on fighting Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, although by this time we're starting to say, hey, we want to pull out of Afghanistan and Iraq, and right now both countries are still broken, right? So what we've done by focusing on Iraq, we have basically put ourselves in a position where there are two countries that we are now responsible for fixing. All right. So what about Bush's domestic agenda? What does Bush do domestically? The first thing is a $1.3 trillion tax cut. He says we're going to get money into people's hands and they're going to be able to spend it, right? The No Child Left Behind Act, if you remember, Perot had talked about no pass, no play. So Bush says what we're going to do is we're going to have tests to show that students are able to go into the next class, so that people are not just passed along and not able to read or write. And sadly, even though we did this, I have still seen people who got into college who were not able to read and write, even basic reading. So, but this is an attempt to keep that from happening. We established Homeland Security because we're like, well, the FBI and the other, ICE and the other organizations didn't do a good enough job protecting us during 9/11. So we're going to have an overarching organization that will help us to do that. And so they create Homeland Security. The Space Shuttle Columbia explodes, which then creates a lot of problems for NASA and space, because we're like, wow, what did we do wrong? We don't want to have any more problems like that. We start looking at racism in law enforcement and say federal law enforcement can't use race in stops to make sure, hey, why are you who you are? Are you here illegally? No, you cannot use race as a part of that decision. He bans late-term abortions, and for the first time, you start to see prescriptions included in Medicare. Abu Ghraib, does Abu Ghraib mean anything to you guys? Okay, one person. While we were in Iraq, Abu Ghraib was a prison that the Iraqis used. I was really sad because I didn't realize, but so they had a lot of torture equipment there. And I mean, we're stupid Americans. When I first got there, they were like, hey, this is really amazing. This piece of equipment is used for torture. And you'd be like, how does that work? And so they would show you. What we didn't realize is that all the people around knew how the torture equipment sounded, right? So when people were showing each other how the equipment worked, they started thinking that we were torturing people. So we quickly found out, and they're like, do not use these pieces of equipment anymore. And so everybody's like, okay, got it, because we can understand that's going to have negative repercussions. However, they brought in some guard personnel from West Virginia, and they started detaining people there. The CIA got involved, and the next thing you knew, we were actually doing our own torture. We would threaten the prisoners with dogs. We would make them be naked in front of women, which is a huge religious violation for them. We had them stand, and they thought that they were going to be electrocuted. We had them stand for hours. So there were some pretty horrible things that we did. Some of the people I worked with said, well, it's not torture because they did bad things to us. But in my mind, torture is torture, and the U.S. should never be involved in torture. Because we're all about doing the right thing. If you're about doing the right thing, then you can't torture people. So some of the younger enlisted personnel who are working there did not perceive what they were doing as torture. They were told that it was fine. They were told no problem with it. So what do you do at your age? Sorry, I'm not trying to be obnoxious. Selfies, right?
Yeah.
So they were taking selfies of themselves torturing the prisoners. And I do believe that they did not believe that what they were doing was torture, because why would you take a selfie of torturing somebody, right? But once the pictures get out, then people realize what's going on there. And so this is a huge, huge black eye for the US, because again, it's like, okay, so you attacked a country that you didn't need to attack for a reason that doesn't make sense, and now you're torturing people in that country. So huge black eye. And then in May, Massachusetts approved same-sex marriages, and this is the first time in U.S. history that you have same-sex marriage legalized in anywhere. So the election of 2004, how is Bush looking? Some people really like him. Some people really do not like him, right? Some people say, hey, he helped us with Afghanistan. He helped us in the fight against terrorism. Other people say, wait a minute, he took us into Iraq, and by this time, word is getting out that we should not have gone into Iraq. There was no WMD. And I forgot to tell you, in the last election, after the election was over, some news media went through and they did determine that Florida would have gone to Bush. So even had they not, just declared the election, Bush would have been elected. So in 2004, Bush is the Republican candidate. John Kerry is the Democratic candidate. The Democrats trash what we've done in Iraq. And the Republicans are like, hey, let's focus more on social issues. You want to have more of the conservative social viewpoints. And so it is the greatest election turnout in decades. And what you see now is a more central versus East Coast, West Coast, and the Rust Belt, right? Bush wins this election again, so he gets a second term. So what happens in his second term? Wow, I'm whipping through this a lot quicker than I thought. He creates the Director of National Intelligence. Now, why would he create the Director of National Intelligence? Failure of 9/11. They said that 9/11 was a failure of the intelligence community because we should have recognized that there was going to be an attack on the U.S. Now, I will say, I think on behalf of the U.S. Intelligence community, there was no way legally that we could do, as I said, the international side could not talk to the law enforcement side. The law enforcement side could not talk to the international side. So I do believe that there needed to be a change in the law that said you can talk to each other. And I will say, even after they changed the law, I have a really good friend who was in CIA, and I remember one point he was talking to me and he said he had information that he thought he should give to the FBI, and so he caught the FBI person in the embassy and he was like, hey, I have some information for you, but she knew who he was, and she was like, I'm not talking to you, I'm walking away. And he's like, no, you have to hear this. And she's like, no, I'm not listening. And so he said, as he moved closer to her, she started to walk away quickly. So he started to run to catch up. She ran away from him, got to her office and was yelling, I can't hear you, I can't hear you. Got in the office, locked the door. And I mean, it sounds pretty childish, but why would she do that? What's the reasoning? Any thoughts? FBI has to take everything they do to court, right? So at this point, what is the credibility of the CIA in terms of gathering information, right? Everybody's like, well, the CIA tortures people. And she was like, I don't want any information that could cause us problems in a trial. I don't want any information that could potentially put us in a position where we have to admit that someone was tortured to get this information. And so she was just like, I'm not going to listen to you, versus potentially listening and then saying, hey, thank you, but I don't want to know this because I can't use this in a trial. So the next thing that happens is Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina hit into New Orleans, and it completely destroyed their infrastructure. for days before the hurricane, everybody's like, you need to get out of New Orleans. You need to make sure that you're safe. A lot of the poorer people, a lot of the people said, no, we're going to stay here. We have no place else to go. And so when the floodwaters came in and it destroyed all of their the infrastructure to keep the water out of the city, as you can see, the city was completely flooded. They had to come in and pull people off of buildings sometimes. They actually had the big football stadium there, and people stayed in the stadium. Bush took some heat for this because they said, well, the federal government should have done more, FEMA should have done more, but there was a whole lot of blame to go around between the city, the state, and the federal government. So this is something that now we kind of relook at how we do business. In 2006, Bush vetoes stem cell research because the only way to get the stem cells is to have aborted babies. And so he's like, nope, we are not going to have research done based on people who are dead. He constructs he starts the bill and puts money toward constructing a wall, a fence on the Mexican border to reduce illegal immigration. And so it's interesting that Trump gets a lot of credit or hit for that, but it actually starts back during W. Bush and actually before that, with trying to create a fence. This is one of the biggest things that really frustrates me. So when Colin Powell went to the UN and talked about that Iraq had yellow cake, and that yellow cake could be given to the terrorists, and the terrorists could use it to create a nuclear bomb, there was a person who anonymously wrote in and basically said, hey, this is not reasonable, this is not realistic. She was a CIA operative. The Bush administration was really ticked off at her for telling the truth and preventing them from accomplishing what they wanted to do. So what they did is out her as a CIA operative, which basically ensured that she will never be able to do her job again. She was in a really, really good position because she was the wife of an ambassador. And as the wife of an ambassador, you have to go to all the parties, you have to go to all the things, and you can basically say, oh, you know, if you get caught doing something, you're like, well, I didn't know, you know, I'm just, you know, his wife, I'm sorry, I'll leave and I'll go somewhere else, right? So she would have had significant access, significant capability, but because she did not go with the plan on attacking Iraq, they call her out and they notify the entire world that she is a CIA operative. In my mind, that is treason, and you should be executed. But Cheney's chief of staff is convicted, not of doing that, but of perjury and obstruction of justice when they were trying to find out who did it. And Bush commutes his sentence saying, it's okay, we don't care that you destroyed our intelligence capability, we don't care that you harmed someone's life, it's okay because you did what we wanted to do politically. So that still really frustrates me. Then in 2008, you had the Great Recession. And in the Great Recession, you start to see, you know, you've had home prices are going up. They start saying, hey, because we don't want to be racist, everybody has to be able to have a home. And so even if your credit is not good enough, you're going to have the ability to borrow money. The problem with that is if you don't have the money to pay it back, then there's some real problems. So banks are being required to give money to people who don't have the income to pay it back. And then now what do you do with that? The only way to get people to take those loans is they tied them together with other good loans, and they said, no, this is all good. So amazingly enough, as long as housing prices are going up, then everything is great, right? But when housing prices start to go down, then those people can't afford their homes anymore, and now you have all of these loans out there that can't be taken care of. So the Bush administration looks at this, and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are two of the big loan organizations for houses. And so the U.S. Treasury actually takes over Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and say, hey, we'll go ahead and take the debts. So the U.S. government takes the debts of all this housing mess that has been created and puts it on the backs of the taxpayers. And then the banks are starting to fail. So Bush gives $700 billion to the banks to say, we don't want the banks to fail. So instead of allowing the bad banks to fail and then giving the money to the people whose money has been in the banks, they go ahead and take care of the banks and keep the banks with the same leadership they've had and allow them to continue on. And then finally, they bail out GM and Chrysler because they are going under, and they say, all right, instead of saying, hey, you guys should have been building better cars, we're going to go ahead and bail you out, make sure that you have the money to keep operating and keep going. A lot of people are really, really frustrated by this because they're like, wait a minute, some of these companies, you told to make bad decisions, and now you're giving them U.S. tax dollar money. That's not fair to the U.S. taxpayer. Others, the companies made really poor decisions, and you took our money and gave it to them anyway. So this is one of the things where I wish we would go back to, man, I just lost his name. During the Depression, the president who said, look, this is just kind of a bad time, let things work. I think sometimes you say, hey, let things work, and if people made poor business decisions, then somebody else will buy them out and fix it. All right. So in 2008, can Bush run again? No. He's already had two terms in office. So at this point, the Democrats, the two key players are Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Everybody thought Hillary Clinton was a shoo-in, right? Because she is a Clinton, she's well known. Barack Obama was this young guy that people really hadn't heard of. But during the campaign, he presents himself in a better light, and she has a lot of baggage that's still riding with her from previous elections, from Bill Clinton's administrations. And so the Democrats nominate Barack Obama. The Republicans select John McCain. So anybody know who John McCain is? Okay, he's a centrist, he's a war hero. He spent time in World War II, he was a Navy guy. Not in World War II, in Vietnam. He was captured by the Vietnamese, he was held in the Hanoi Hilton. And so he has gone through a lot for the nation. He is a centrist, and so a lot of people thought, okay, John McCain, the Democrats are far to the left on this one. John McCain is going to be a centrist. So John McCain decides, you have your first black candidate, and so the Republicans need a token as well. And so he goes and he grabs Sarah Palin, who is the governor of Afghanistan. And when he selects her, I'm sorry?
The governor of who?
Of Alaska. Thank you.
Okay, I was like, wait, where?
Yeah. talking too quick and not thinking well enough. So she's the governor of Alaska, and he's like, okay, she is young, she's attractive, and she's a woman, so this will be a great vice presidential candidate. The problem comes once she is on the ticket, he doesn't like what she believes on certain things. And so instead of getting the two of them together and kind of saying, hey, what are we going to say? How are we going to make sure that we have the same perspective on issues? He just kind of lets her hang out to dry, and he says she doesn't know what she's talking about. So this creates a problem between, like, your presidential candidate and your vice presidential candidate are not on the same wavelength. And so people are like, well, that's not good. And so now the campaign is a lot harder for the Republicans. The Democrats worked really hard to tie McCain into the W. Bush administration and kind of have him be responsible for the Iraq War, for Katrina, and for the recession. The Republicans basically said Obama has only done small-time things. He's not ready to jump in and be president. And so both sides were pretty hard. I will say there were some discussions over Obama's citizenship, so I really want to make sure we address this. So anybody know what the rules are on being president?
You gotta be a U.S. citizen.
Okay, you have to be a U.S. citizen. So what are the rules about being a U.S. citizen? Do anybody know?
If you're born in the country, you're a U.S. citizen. If your parents are U.S. citizens, you're a U.S. citizen.
Yes. So if you're born in the U.S., you're a U.S. citizen. Or if your parents are U.S. citizens, then you're a U.S. citizen, right? So my son was born in Misawa, Japan, right? So is he Japanese? No. In fact, the Japanese absolutely refused their... No. If your parents are not Japanese, you will not be Japanese. Both his parents are U.S. citizens, so my son got a record of birth from the U.S. Embassy in Japan that said, yes, he is a U.S. citizen because his parents are citizens, right? So, anybody know who Barack Obama's parents are? His dad is from Kenya, right? Not a U.S. citizen. His mom is a white woman from Kansas. Is she a U.S. citizen? Yes. So all this nonsense about whether he's a citizen or not, if his mom was a U.S. citizen, is he a citizen?
Yeah.
Yes. So I don't understand all this, oh, well, he might not be a citizen because he wasn't born in the U.S. Okay, stop. His mom's a U.S. citizen.
Where was he born at that made that such a hard thing for people to grasp?
So some people said that on school records, he said that he was a Kenyan citizen or Indonesian citizen. And so they are saying, well, then he wasn't born in the U.S., therefore. So I don't really know, but at the end of the day, there was a birth certificate from Hawaii, and, again, it really doesn't matter because unless he negated his U.S. citizenship, his mom's a U.S. citizen, so, he's a U.S. citizen. So Obama won the election overwhelmingly. He is the first African-American president in the U.S. Now, as I said, if his mom is white, why is he considered the first African-American president? Okay, because if you remember back in the old bad days, you had anybody that they're like 1/8 or sometimes significantly lower African American blood, you were considered African American. So he says, you know what, I'm half African American, so I declare myself to be African American. All right, so how did 9/11 lead to the U.S. invading Iraq a second time? This is intended to be a tough question. Because what is the answer?
It didn't.
It didn't. We chose to go into Afghanistan. It gave us a fig leaf to say we want to attack Iraq, and so we will just do so. And so there's nothing in 9/11 that ties to Iraq. There's nothing that says Iraq was going to do anything. But we decided that we wanted to invade Iraq, so we used 9/11 and the Bush Doctrine to say they could be a threat, therefore we will attack them. All right, what is the Bush Doctrine?
We can go and attack anyone who is a threat to the United States.
All right, we can attack anyone that we consider a threat to the U.S. And again, this is a terrifying doctrine, if you think about it, because this means if we use this statement to attack other countries, is there any country that could not attack the U.S. using the same doctrine? Realistically, we are a threat to pretty much every nation on earth, right? Not that we plan on doing anything about it, but that we could harm them if we chose to. So if you set up a doctrine that says you can attack anybody who could harm you, then you are setting yourself up as, okay, then you guys can attack us. So I think we have moved away from that doctrine, and everybody says this is really stupid. All right, what contributed to the 2008 recession? Housing market plummeting, the banks failing. So very similar to what happened in the 1920s, right? Where everything kind of builds up past what its value is, and then now it crashes. All right. So we are going to do President Obama. I am kind of starting to expand this area because I realized that you guys did not grow up knowing President Obama. So I will go ahead, we'll talk about President Obama. Over the Thanksgiving break, I would like you to think about what history has happened since you grew up. Does that make sense? So we'll talk about Obama, and then the next class period, our last class period, there will not be a quiz unless you want a quiz. If you want a quiz, then I will just tell you, write down something that happened during your lifetime that you think will be in the history books. So, do you guys want a quiz or do you not want one?
On Monday?
On Wednesday, next Wednesday.
No, class on Monday.
So Monday will be Obama,
Oh,
and then the next Wednesday will be so think about that. You guys can determine if we want to have a quiz or not. Yes, ma'am.
Are these questions going to be on the final?
No, those questions will not be on the final. So, all right. Any other thoughts or concerns? All right, I will see you later.